This is hidden gem. Things a little bit.
This is hidden gem.
For real, check.
This is hidden gem.
Hidden gem.
This is
What's up, everybody? This is episode 87 tonight. We have my man One9 on here tonight, who's going to give us a very, very special episode tonight. I just want to say thank you, One9, for being a part of this whole Hidden Gems podcast. It's an honor to have you on here. But yeah, I mean, not where it starts, but more importantly, can you give people an introduction to yourself nowadays, and then kind of bring it back to your family background as well?
Sure thing, man. I appreciate you and everything you're doing with this Hidden Gems. You know, the story of DC culture is extremely important, you know, because to me, there's so many intersecting stories and back cultures and, you know, places that don't really get recognized in the sense that in a way that we can tell it. And to have yourself as well as so many others who have documented and grew up in this time period is essential. You know, it is a very special and unique place, Washington, D.C., and I was born and raised there. You know, currently right now I am film director and producer, and you know I go by the name One9. That name has its roots coming out of the DC area, and I kept it because what it reminded me of the freedom and the independence and really just the underdog mentality that came out of DC at that time period. And to me, it's always a reflection back to that. So, you know, to tell the whole story, you know, we can take it back to the very beginnings and, you know, really uncover the layers of what really, you know, took place. And to my best recollection, you know, respectfully give everybody the respect due of who made this time period so special and unique. So thank you. You know, I would just probably start really with the number 7. That number really resonates with me more so because that was the day I was born. I was born on the 7th. That number always resonated with me as a young kid earlier on, to really understanding, you know, all the many facets of the spirituality, the power, the resonance with that number. But to me, I've always been, you know, magnified and just, you know, really try to use that number as something that, you know, specialized, means something more than just a number. It means something to me. It means of, you know, a freedom in a sense. So, you know, that to me is where it all began. But I'll take it all the way back, man. You know, I was born in the DC area. My mother here on the left is Filipino. She was born in Manila. My father was born in New York City, Lower East Side. You know, very, very interesting, you know, couple of my mothers, you know, moved here in the 60s. My father grew up in the time period during the Great Recession. He came of age, you know, during the jazz era of the 50s. So, you know, music and jazz has always been the backbone in my father's life. He got a chance to firsthand see Duke Ellington and Billie Holiday and, you know, see the jazz greats coming of age at the time period that they were creating these masterpieces. So music was always in my household, specifically, you know, Ella Fitzgerald, like I said, Duke, Billie, as well as classical music, you know, Mozart and Beethoven. So early on, you know, for me, music was the foundation. I actually was playing classical music as a little kid because of, you know, if you have no Filipino mothers, they encourage you to take piano lessons. So to me, music was, you know, always the forefront of what we were hearing in the house. But, you know, my father, man, to me, I got the spiritual side of who I am from her. And I've got, like, in a sense, discipline and, you know, a little bit of cultural history from my father's side. So he grew up, like I said, Lower East Side of New York during the time period where he actually met, you know, Lucky Luciano and, you know, the whole gangs of New York at that time period. So he was telling me you couldn't call him Lucky. You see him in the pool halls, you had to call him Mr. Luciano. My grandparents had a small grocery store that they had to store guns for the mob. It was like $1 or $2 a week underneath the fridge. So all these backstories is just real, you know, in-depth history of, at least from his perspective, was fascinating to me, because I really was, the way he would tell a story really brought you all the way in. And after a certain time period in New York, he went to World War II. He was in Normandy, and from that, the stories that I heard of, he was in the 4th Armored Division under Patton, met Patton. They stormed Normandy, and those moments were, as you can imagine, traumatizing. But he carried all of that in him and carried this sense of discipline that I love what he stood for, in the sense that he wasn't afraid of anything, no matter what it was. He just been through trials and tribulations of war, and was able to instill in me, in a sense of like, believing in yourself, believing whatever it is you want to do, and fight for it. So that sense of independence and freedom really stems, from early family life. But I remember one time I took him to see Private Ryan, and he stood up in the theater and he was like, "That's how it is. That's how it is." And I had to, grab him, make sure he was okay, and I could see how much memories were triggering, from those days. So in a sense, he really gave me that ability to paint a picture, in a sense too. I remember the early days of these records. They would also have a book with them, in a sense, these kind of flip books. And as a kid, he would, we would play the record, whatever it would be, and it would have a story, and he would record me listening to it, and it would stop the record and says what would happen next. And he would make me ad lib all of these various situations as a little kid, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And every night would be a different story that I have to ad lib. And to me, I think that was the very beginnings of the imagination running wild, and the ability to take a situation and then turn it and flip it and then become a new situation. So the ability to think spontaneous and to ad lib came from those days. So again, DC in the 80s, my family, they moved to the Silver Spring area, but I was running around DC a lot. We'll get into all of this, but from what I remember, again, these are just images and things of the time period. Reagan was the president. War on drugs were on. I remember vaguely the assassination attempt on his life. DC was such a polarized city in the 80s. It was a tale of really two cities. You had, there was a 14th Street, and I remember, specifically it was like the White House eventually became, down the street, the crack house, and then the whorehouse. So the White House, the whorehouse, and the crack house, all of these things, as a young kid, you would start to see and feel what the city was about. At that time, I remember it was called Chocolate City. Mayor Barry was the mayor, and he really represented, the underdog. He represented the community, represented, the city in its truest sense, and the people loved him. 2-time mayor, even despite the all the allegations and the indictments that came, he still was the beloved people's champ. He was the people's mayor. So as a young kid, you see these on the news, but eventually time would go on. I would get a chance to meet with him and then see how these things really affected just my life personally. But these are some of the most earliest recollections that I remember. At that time period, the Georgetown Hoyas were winning championships, and they, again, at the time, you never saw an all-black team, all-black coach, really putting the city on the map. Like, to me, Georgetown Hoyas represented the DC mentality. They went hard, they were just gifted, and they were just dominant, and I love that about watching that time period. Was also a player on University of Maryland, Len Bias. He's just a superstar, man. We love that time period. Washington was called, at that was the Redskins. You had the Hogs, the Fun Bunch. I was a sports head, so I was seeing all of this. The Washington basketball team was called the Bullets at the time period, and the fashion, at that time, it was New Balance, Coca-Cola shirts, Madness, colorful gear, Felines. I remember I would hear about Rayful Edmonds and the cocaine trade, asymmetric haircuts. These are things as a young kid that I would see, and would start to just slowly start to infiltrate into the things that I was starting to build upon. So at that time period, Atari was out. These are some of the things that I would see. I would see a lot of the posters, the go-go posters all over the city. Eventually I would get to clubs like the 930 and you would see a mix of go-go and punk and early hip hop at that time. So again, coming of age for me early was just a hybrid of music based things that from early go-go stuff that I would hear, and I would start to get deeper into hip hop. And that really started coming on trips to New York. As a kid, we would go visit, my grandparents, or sometimes I would go with friends. But I remember early on, like in the Lower East Side, I would see these big handball courts. These are some of my photos I took that I would see. It was Lee Quinones did these handball courts. And I was just blew me away at the vast scale of what I was seeing. So I remember taking early pictures of some of this, and just this to me was starting to blow me away. Like as a kid, this was around the time that Subway Art came out, a documentary called Style Wars, which I probably have watched like 30, 40 times at that time. So this was slowly starting to embed in me, and I was really starting to take on everything that hip hop was about at that time period. But this piece, the Duck piece, they were like right around the corner from each other, and then this big mural. I forget what street that was on, but I think this was in Beach Street, but that to me, the larger than life, bigger, large scales, just burners. I was just like blown away as a little kid, just seeing this stuff. Anyway, so back then, coming back to DC, I was working a lot in the city, taking the buses, metro buses all day, every day. You didn't have much money. At that time, I was actually working in Georgetown. A friend of mine, his mother had a 7-Eleven, I think right on Wisconsin Avenue. And I would take the metro bus like 2 or 3 times, and you would see all these tags, like just all in the back of the bus, like all over the bus, really. So that to me was like the first time I was really getting into like seeing DC graffiti. And I would see like GAC. Come to learn it was like Gangster Chronicles, which was a gang at the time, and I learned about the A-Team and them, and you would see Cool Disco Dan tags everywhere. What's Up Woody was another one I would always see with these little faces, and so I started at that time tagging in the back of the bus. So this is all right. So this time period, I was working in Georgetown, and I was enamored by like gold nameplates and 2-finger rings. So this is, me in high school. I always liked having a lot of women around me, at that time. So I would buy whatever money I was making. I was going to buy like a little jewelry with it, or like 2-finger ring, or whatever it was. So I had just stuff at that time period. But around this time, I remember watching the movie Rocky, right? And I loved Sylvester Stallone's character in that. So I just took the name early. My first tag was Sly, or Sly C. I don't know why I added the C at the end. I thought maybe it was calling it Slick, but I just remember writing Sly a lot. And, my very first, I guess, time getting up anywhere was with some friends at, this was actually the Wheaton Metro station before there was a train station there. They were just building it. And we came up like somewhere, I think late afternoon, or somewhere, just rolled up to the wall. I did my first piece. It was probably like mid 80s. And again, just learning how to do anything. So this was the time period that we were in. I was just, grab paint, just did it. I had a friend of mine that came down from New York. I went to high school with him. He wrote Soho at the time. Another friend wrote Saki. So those are the other pieces on the right. So that was the first time I remember getting up anywhere. That time period, we had like a lot of cassette tapes. So we would listen to PA tapes, they call it. So Junkyard, Rare Essence. And eventually, as I got a little older, probably like 15, 16, maybe 17, around that time, we would go to the 930 Club. And that was on 9th and F Street, the old one. It was like a little hole in the wall spot. Really dope place that really, I didn't realize at the time how much that would shape me, but I would see all this punk rock stuff, go-go, and early hip hop. So like some venues, some nights you would see, like I remember one night, I think it was might have been Trouble Funk, might have been Bad Brains, and like KRS. It was like early shit. I was blown. I mean, everybody I remember would just be cramped into this one spot, and we would go to these shows a lot. So I would, I don't remember all the stuff, but I just remember seeing some posters and things at that time, and just also going to these hole in the wall like little like like punk shows, but they would be in the weird places in Georgetown. I can't even remember, like trying to remember like a church they would empty out somewhere, but I remember some of those. But to me, what was really resonating was hip hop at that time. So this was one of the first shows that I remember was on 90.1. It's called Breakers Delight. It was Frank Ski and Larry G. And I used to have recordings of this, but what made this show so dope was they would play all the deep underground instrumentals or just stuff that was coming out, in the moment, early 80s, mid 80s probably at that time. And they would shout out like the Breakers or the Graph Right or whoever. You could literally get shout outs by them on air. So I was tuning in, I was calling in my name. At that point, I can't remember if I was writing Sly, I think around, I was doing that. So, but this to me was a galvanizer. I remember one time they were saying, hey, we're going to be at the Adams Morgan's Day Festival, or I think it was called something else, Columbus Day Festival at that point. And they had all the breaker crews come through, and everybody would meet up down in Adams Morgan. And at that point, that's when I was going, and that's when I met a lot of the early writers at that time. Again, I'm trying to remember some of the names, but one of the guys I would see a lot is this guy named Kenny or Kaz. He was a connector of so many people, and he and him became friends. I think he worked at a comic book store, and so he connected me to these other writers that I would see their names up a lot, especially this guy named Scott. Scott was on the Red Line. I think he was from New York at the time, and we all met up around 9th and F Street, because I think there was a Wild Style piece from the movie around the corner. And somehow we wound up painting around that area. And so this is us at that time. I don't know if you can see this, but Scott was up. There's a writer named Brink. He went to Wilson. His name was Yamil. There was a writer named Jimmy, named Miser. Kenny had the blue shirt on, and like I said, he was a good friend of mine. And there was me in the middle. I think I had on a Sergio Tacchini, sweatshirt, and probably couldn't afford
fresh, man. Looking fresh.
So this is like mid 80s, man, like 86, somewhere in that time. But anyways, this was like what I remember, like the first time like we were starting to like come together with different crews, just different writers. We were all kind of freestyle doing our own thing, but this was a loose clique that we just kind of hung out time to time. And, I really was starting to get full-fledged into like just the whole culture, not just the writing aspect, but every part of it. I was really starting to see names. And, at that time it was, what I remember was Sir Rec, I said Cool Disco Dan, Ultra, it was factions of crews everywhere. But for me, I wasn't in the sense of like on bombing missions. I love what everybody brings to the table. But for me, I was still trying to develop a style. Like I was drawing a lot. So I was kind of selective on what I was doing at the time period. I was, a lone wolf. I was kind of just on my own. But these were some of the folks that I remember hanging out with at that time. So fast forward, we'd see trains on Rhode Island Avenue. I had a friend of mine. We go down there and take a lot of flicks. So I think this was Maze. I think this was done by Scott, from what I remember. But I just pulled up a photo, and I remember my friend. His name was Amir or Kenyan at that time period before he converted to Islam. But me and him hung out all the time. He was from New York, and he had all these New York photos of trains and everything. So we were drawing a lot back then. All right, so next period for me that I remember was I bought an airbrush, and at the time period, I was doing jean jackets and shirts, and I was literally going to high school and making money. Like I was like painting people's jeans and jean jackets, doing the graffiti on them. Let me know if you can see this or if you want to jump in at any point. But from on the left was a girl named Hilda. She came from New York also. She was a dancer for the real Roxanne. Roxanne and UTFO at that point was big. And somehow she had connected with me about doing, at that time I was doing a lot of this. I was doing like everything, jeans, jean jackets, shirts. As you can see, I did panties, real big on a lot of freaky shit back then with anything I could get my hands on, man. So, oh, the one on the far left, a friend of mine brought this girl. She was about 16. I think I might have been 17 around that time. And she was rapping. And her name was Mary. And I remember like she wanted some jeans. And so she came to my basement. We painted some stuff for her. Wound up, she moves to New York and she becomes Mecca from Diggable Planets. So I remember before that, she was in my basement and we were just doing some graffiti for her. And she was like very skilled at that time period. I couldn't believe like that became the girl Mecca from Diggable Planets at that period. But anyway, so that was early on. And then I was doing like backdrops for like go-go's or like whatever club parties that were happening. That's the picture on the far right. These are all I have. Like there's a lot more, but I can't find them all. So I found some of these and I just threw them up. So again, so around this time, it's probably the 80s, the music was becoming like bigger and bigger. I used to go to shows. First time I saw big acts was at the Capitol Center, which was where the Washington Bullets and the Washington Capitals played. And they used to put on these big shows with like hip hop acts. Like at that time I saw it was Run DMC, Houdini, but they would have go-go bands playing there too, like Essence, Funk, Experience Unlimited, EU, Slick Rick, Dougie Fresh, maybe playing with the go-go band. I think I remember some of that. So I would go to the Cap Center. I would go like at the time period, some of the street festivals. I think it was George Avenue Day, and I started to see, a lot of go-go. But for me, I do remember this, we used to play on the walls, like with a whole bunch of people taking a different part of the wall that had the bass part, a little lighter part. It would be like 7 to 10 of us like banging on the wall, like to these go-go beats. That to me, I remember really doing that and like taking pencils, taking things and just clicking them and hitting them on desks and all that. So, early time periods was early just getting up into the culture, having an airbrush, hustling to make some money, doing backdrops, and then like running around the city at that point because it was a lot. To me, it was a lot to do. And this is around like mid to late 80s, early, maybe going into the early 90s. So at this point, I went to high school, graffiti was like starting to really come on strong. And to me, the advent of the zines started coming around. And the zine was just like, a time period where you was just kind of cut and paste style. Like a lot of people were drawing in black books. But there was also this cut and paste thing that you just staple or put some little magazines together and sell them. So at my high school was a guy named Richie, who used to write Dial One. We went to Kennedy. He came down from New York. I think he was like a year or two younger than me, but a lot of the kids that were in hip hop at the time kind of loosely hung out. And at that time period, I met a friend of mine, top left, named Rob Smith was the sickest drummer, man. And at that time, he was drawing a lot, like drawing these like abstract stuff. So we got together and started doing this first kind of zine. And I remember Richie had a friend, this girl, and she was so dope, man. She was a ill-ass writer. And she worked at this print shop in Tacoma Park. Her name was Cedar. And she was she was writing Shell Love. So I was like, man, and she would hook us up for prints at this spot in Tacoma Park. And so we loosely were all starting to hang out. It's me, Richie, her, and a writer named Rust at that time period. And we would take trips to New York. But I remember this is like something me and Rob did called BOE. At that time, it was like an acronym for like Bitch of Expression or Breath of Evolution, or Balance of Extremes. So I started working on this zine around 92. I think I can see the year on it now. And this was like the prequel to like a lot of what I was eventually getting into, but I was really into more like drawing at that time, illustrating and getting into. So the characters you see at the top, Cedar drew or Shell drew the top one here. I think Russ, oh no, Dawan did the figure at the top right. I did the sexual stuff in the middle because that was kind of the vibe I was on. Trumpet player, I was listening to a lot of jazz at the time. So, you know, this is just a hybrid of what we were getting into. And I was also incorporating a lot of photographers from the time period who were like, you know, sending me stuff. So this was an early zine. So running around the city, I come to meet this crazy ass DJ named Lofty Love from London. This dude was wild as fuck. I remember like first time meeting him, like maybe 5 of us. He was like, "Yeah, I gotta get some gear from the store." We went to this thrift store, and he had like trash garbage bags with him, and he just fills them up, and he just rolls out. Like I was like, he didn't pay for nothing. And I was like, all right. And I was like, that's first impression. But I really liked the guy because he had a huge record collection, and I started getting into music at that time period. So again, I'm doing shirts. I'm starting to do zines. I'm starting to do, you know, graph stuff here and there. And then what he told me was, I want to open up a store on U Street, right? I think I was around 19 at the time. And U Street, you know, the history of U Street was, you know, the historic music scene. It was burnt out during the MLK riots. So there wasn't a lot of things going on U Street. But apparently, like, he needed to funnel some money into it because whatever activities he was doing, it just became that store. So around this time during the zines, I was also into like this kind of like very abstract art movement called Dadaism, which was kind of like this Salvatore Dali kind of cut and paste, very anti-art. You know, it was just very, very, just very experimental. So, you know, I was drawing a lot of that stuff. So I was like, let me call the store. This is some, sorry, I don't have better pictures. This is some of the time period we were hanging out around the time we opened the store up. So the store opened up on U Street. It's called Head Flows. There's a picture of it. I think that's me painting Charles Mingus photo. The character in the middle was Shayla. She painted that. So it became a hybrid store of all types of shit, man. It was like screen printed shirts that I was doing. We had someone in the corner who made clothes out of hemp ivory wear, I think it was called. A lot of artists from Howard would come through. A lot of DJs would come through. We would have turntables in there, and you could buy whatever sort of paraphernalia of like illegal shit you wanted in the back. I remember we had a dude that was running security. He had 6 pit bulls named Thomas. He would walk around making sure shit was cool. So like it was cash and carry in the back. You'd get whatever you wanted. But I would open the store up and, you know, and just run it. And we had all types of characters coming in here. So around this time period, we started doing a lot of parties. This is really Lofty's thing. So at this point, I was moving into graphics and doing like flyers. So, you know, this was on the inside of the store. I had my friend Reveal. He did an ill just piece on the inside of the store, inside when behind the counter. So this became like the flyer for the store here called Head Flows. Now at that time period, you know, a lot of people would come through. So I think they recorded a show on Rap City with Ultra Magnetics. And to me, Ultra was like one of the key components of what I was building out. I mean, influential to what I was building out. So like I would literally listen to Kool Keith and the way he rhymes so asymmetrically and off. This is where I kind of wanted to play the music so you can hear the shit, but we'll get into it. But to me, I was drawing what I was hearing. So like the way he rhymed, I was really trying to draw that shit out, like, and make whatever drawings I was doing at the time very, very symbolic to what I was hearing. So if it was, you know, Charlie Parker or Kool Keith or Mobb Deep or Mozart, like that's the shit that was like in my head, and I was like drawing the stuff out. So, you know, my mind was also going very abstract, but I was trying to like express this, you know, literally like on whatever it is I had access to. So at that time period, U Street was building up. So Lofty knew the owner named Stewart, and he opened up this club called State of the Union. which became a land fucking mark in DC. To me, this is like the hub of like where so many of hip hop world, the graph world, music world, like it became just a really, really, you know, cornerstone of, to me, the underground parts that I loved in DC. And we kind of helped, kind of promoted it. We had access to paint anything we wanted inside. So I wound up painting like stuff in the hallways, called different friends of mine to like paint the back. I invited a friend of mine I went to high school with named Bill Source. He was like a resident DJ there. Lofty was DJing there. I mean, there was so many different heads. I'm sure they could all chime in on like what state meant to them. And to me, specifically, it was like just a real, you know, coming of age moment. So we had the store on 15th and U. The State of the Union, I think, was 15, 17 U. So it was literally like a block and a half up the street. And slowly, like more and more, stores were starting to develop and bars around the U Street corridor. So like this was like early 90s. This is the period that I remember being there and just bringing a lot of just that energy, underground energy, into the space. And to me, that was like one of the, you know, early moments that really helped shape DC. But if you want to jump in anytime, bro, just jump in. Let's
No, keep going, man. You in the zone, man. You in the zone.
Yeah. So okay. So to the right, I mean, these were some of the acts that I remember that really were like setting it off. There was Priest and Nomad. I actually wound up doing his logos. So I think that's the logo I did for him. I did a couple of them, but that's one of them on the flyer. I was doing flyers a lot at this time period. Opus Akaban was fucking dope, man. Unspoken Herd. I mean, I would see a lot of these acts. I think I did this whole flyer now I'm looking at it. So this was like the music at the time period that we were hearing, right? And that was resonating in, to me, underground DC. On the left, this was a real like game-changing club called Exodus. Now, this is outside of hip hop. It was embellished in there too, but there were, like, I'm reading it now, rare grooves, acid jazz, reggae, underground sounds. So this was kind of put on with a guy named Eric Hilton. He went on to create Thievery Corporation, but this was like, to me, one of the first times I was seeing the club scene of like outside of hip hop, but starting to like grow. I remember Q-Tip would come through there early like Tribe years. I can't remember. Brand New Heavies was a group called Brand New Heavies. So I mean, this was like a hybrid world of what, you know, you had underground hip hop. You also had this coming around at that time period. So it was starting to break into house also. So we were throwing these warehouse parties. I was doing a lot of flyers at that point. That's kind of what I remember. Here's another one. So we threw a party called Karma. This was Lofty's thing, and it was like DJ with like maybe some live band stuff. You kind of read it. It was I can't remember, 18th Street on Sunday nights, right? So like deep garage. There was a guy named Dubfire. He went on to bigger and better things. His name was Ali. He was playing at that time period. So this was like rare groove. Like the sounds were coming from like London, mixed with like New York house, mixed with like, you know, a lot of just underground, like low ends. And, you know, at this place, I was actually selling a lot of my shirts that we were having in the store. Just to give you a little like backstory on some of the stuff we were selling. I mean, it was grimy, man. We were going to New York. This was Lofty's idea. Like he would go into the warehouse at Urban Outfitters, dressed in like a suit, very business with his London accent. And he would wholesale buy all this Urban Outfitters shit. At that time, it was like whatever it was. And we would cut the tags and put our own tags on and resell it like double the price at that store. So, I mean, we were doing all types of things. But for me, I was doing screen printed shirts, and I was selling them at the spot Karma. So one little quote hidden gem that came up to me, which was like a really turn period moment, was one of the guys who was at the club came down from New York, very influential in my life, named Ali Ashamur. He was a writer, but he was also a designer. And he was, at that time, you know, he bought all my shirts, I remember, and very supportive. And so we maintained a good relationship. So I remember a couple of trips, you know, going to see him. And I remember one time he was drawing all these farm animals. I was like, yo, what is that shit? And he's like, got this concept taken over to Russell Simmons called Fat Farm. And he was drawing the initial stages of that. And I remember seeing a napkin. He had a big 5 on it, and it was the logo for 555 Soul. But what I love most about Ali Asha, he was a thinker that brought social economic issues to his art, and he was went on to created a lot of skate companies, American Dream, Alphanumeric, Monkey Wrench. Like he's a pioneer in his own field. But I remember at that time, like me and Dial One and Shell and maybe Rust and some others, we would drive to New York and sometimes go by his place and playing beats and showing us all these things. So like the vibe of what we were building, I was learning like to think outside of like the norm of what DC just had, but also what other people were doing. I found this piece he did in one of my piece books called he used to write algebra. Alphanumeric man from Medina. So he lived in Brooklyn. He was part of the BYI, AOK, and CTS, Circle Triangle Square. It gave BOE a new acronym at the time, during the 5% years, Born Cipher for Equality. So all this was being embedded, man. This was like a whole elixir of culture and coming of age of the DIY mentality of like everything we were doing, we were just learning and building and doing. So to me, biggest thing to me in DC at this time period was we had the ability to try things and make them and do them and sell them and without any compromise. And to me, all the different facets that were going on, we had this clothing line with the Madness Shop. What we were doing was totally independent of that. Graff riders, they were bombing the city. Everybody had their own thing, and we'd all see each other in different pockets, and it was all love. To me, like I got so much respect for that time period. So, this was again coming of age. Early years, I had a great friend named Frank Rosario. He went by 5'2", his courier number. He was shooting amazing photos. This was Organized Confusion at the 930 Club. So the music at that time was just really raw, like underground. I remember seeing Group Home and Gangstar and J-Rue at the Ibex, which was primarily a go-go hub. But he shot this photo there. We were, so this I just wanted to give you, a glimpse into like what we were listening to at the time. And then at this time period in DC, a homegrown group that I love, man, we all love, called 3LG, 3 Levels of Genius. And this was like a hip hop band, man. They were like redefining to me, like, this is like, I didn't know the roots. I knew 3LG. And to me, this was like the epitome of like what the sound was becoming. And, they mixed all the different genres into their sound. It was like this raw elixir of music. So this is Mal and my boy Ahmed, who was actually a really, really dope artist. So me and Ahmed, and at the time, I think he was going by 777s or Meta 7 or something in that world. We started painting a lot together. So around this time period, we had the store, was doing all these club flyers and things of that nature. And I think I was working also at Tower Video, but Rust had access to this club called the Crowbar, and they wanted a mural on the outside, kind of a graffiti mural. So like, from what I remember, like it was me, Rust, and my friend Reveal asked 3LG to play on the scaffolding while we were painting, right? So this is a picture of this on 18th and I believe, probably early 90s. I forget the exact year, but this was like, for me, like we were getting into just large scale shit, and this was the actual mural. It said Elevate. Rust did the character. I did all the sun, tribal shit, and Reveal at the time did the words Elevate. But again, another hidden gem moment for me in my life was a dread came up to me at that period and said, look, would you be interested in teaching kids like what you're doing? And I was like, man, I'll be open to it. And he said, look, we'll give you the budget. You can teach them whatever you want to teach them to do. Like, I just need to get them kind of interested in stuff. And they love graffiti, they love this. So it was through DC Parks and Rec. Now, again, if you think about the time period, there weren't a lot of jobs out there. So Marion Barry created the summer job program, which was instrumental for a lot of kids in the inner city, and also just gave people an opportunity. So yeah, I took the job, and at the time I just bought spray paint because at the time I was studying Egyptology. I was reading a lot of books, so I was like comparing graffiti to hieroglyphics. And I remember like teaching them a bit about communication through visual symbols, but also using it to express themselves on the wall. I think I started my first year at the University of Maryland, and I had access to the computer lab. So I was taking the kids to the computer lab to learn about early design. I'm sorry, so there's two parts. There's DC Parks and Rec, and then I was also teaching at Calvary Bilingual Center, which was like pretty close by. So I think I was teaching both. I was taking the kids as part of the Calvary program to college. So this is me. I met Barry, and I was thanking him for this job opportunity. And at that time, we were going to every ward, right? So Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest, and teaching in and out of the schools. So again, to me, what I decided to do was to take a word and to elevate like that word into the environment. So instead of just writing people's names, I took it to, we started putting words up that meant something to the kids, and we would put that on the wall. So this one said mind power. This is something I did with Ahmed, and from 3LG. He did the characters, I did the letters, and I just flipped through a few of them. There's one we did called Spirits. I think this was Southeast, I forget the street, South Capitol I Street. That was a picture of the wall. So I had a student, I know she was at Howard, yeah. She painted like the stuff on the side, and I did the characters, and I did the word spirits. And then here's another one we did. This was on Lincoln, on Columbus, and I forget the cross street. But so this is me and the kids. Like I took them, I showed them how to do fill-ins. This is Ahmed and the Scully. And so this piece was a pinnacle moment because at this time, there was a show on BET called Rap City, right? You see all the rap videos. You had MTV Raps and Rap City. And they did a story on this program that we were doing, and they featured it on their show. So like, teaching kids. So this is like me doing the closer to the fill-in. We had Ahmed did the characters, and I had actually Demon Scope, who I knew him at the time. He did one of the end pieces. He did the Capitol burning down at the end. So yeah, that was the finished one. So like we had kids do the fill-ins. I did the lettering. Ahmed did the characters, and Demon, well, no, his name's Kobe, did this. And I've known him because he used to come into Headflows as a kid, as like a 15-year-old. A lot of writers came through there. So, it was just a good period, man. We were all kind of just working with each other. So anyways, this Rap City does a show. I go over there to pick up, I wanted to get a copy of the tape, and I met the creative director, showed him some sketches. So he winds up hiring me to do logos for the network. And I was like, look, I don't care about any of them. I'll just let me do the Rap City one. So I was doing design at the time, and they let me do Rap City. So this kind of now gave me an introduction to media and TV, right? So doing, Illustrator and After Effects. And then I used to sit in the edit room and watch the editor like work on, promos or whatever it is, putting the shows together. And I would say, look, if you teach me to get the basic core of this editing, I will finish your work for you. So eventually he let me, do some of the projects. I would stay there till 3 in the morning and just absorb all of this information on utilizing a tool. For me, it's all about having the tools and the access to create something. So this was like the first logo I did for them, Rap City. And eventually I got on to learning how to produce. So the head of Rap City at that time, Craig Henry, let me do a show on writers. It was actually called Foundation Series. And at that point, I was like doing the graph one, but he had access to all these legendary figures that I had looked up to, over the course of my life. So I got a chance to work with Futura 2000, Ket, who was just another just go hard graph writer at the time, who actually at that period created Stress Magazine, who's editor in chief, and Kel, one of the graph legends and pioneers. And this is me at the corner, like, you know, when they filmed it. So these guys were very, very, very influential to me because they were breaking out beyond graph. You know, like Ket, you know, to this day he opened now the Museum of Graffiti in Miami. You know, legendary on the trains, but also Stress Magazine was something I was reading all the time. Kel was doing websites. He introduced me to his brother, Mayor 39, who's good friends with me to this day. And, you know, he was doing sculptures. So at that time period, my very first experimental film, which I'd have to find, I actually shot on 16 millimeter. I filmed Mayor doing a sculpture, and I shot that on 16. And that was the first film I really made that aired. And Futura has grown up to become a legend. You know, I mean, bigger than life, larger than life. He's someone I've always loved because he stressed the boundaries. So these are like people that I looked up to, and I got a chance to produce and do this show. So this to me was something that was like very important to me at that time period to like really like get out of learn a new tool really. So at this time period, I wanted to create. I worked with a guy named Nick Blatchford at Calvary to create a fundraiser event at State of the Union. This is the flyer. So we were bringing together all of these different components in hip hop. You know, so if you skim this, we had the DJs at the time period that I knew. We had B-boy crews, soul creators, natural elements. We had a capoeira crew performance. This was all at State of the Union. Performances by Priest, Freestyle Union, so forth. We got some sponsors with it, and you know, we put this on as a fundraiser event. I called it Hieroglyphics in the Alley, and you know, at this point we were painting live, and it was like a really raw, just immersive day of the culture, right? So this is what I kind of remember doing back then. You know, the capoeira was and the b-boy was going on in the back in the alley. This is around pretty cold out there, so you know, I think this was probably like fall, winter. MCing inside, you know, people just, it was packed, man. I mean, this whole day was packed. You know, this is me painting the alley. This is Russ, me, and Shell. You know, so went on into the evening. I think this is one of the pictures of the alleyway we did at the time. Just freestyling, you know, a lot of whatever it was we were doing. A friend Frank took this picture. This is you know, just what it was at the time period. You know, we were just living. So then also through an event called Divine Design, and this was an extension. This was more about, you know, the art when people were getting into the canvases and all this stuff. So I got Rap City to sponsor this. They filmed this. I have the video of this, and you know, I'll have to find that and I'll share it with you at another point. But you know, again, this was like artists that I knew from New York and Japan and all over. So we're all coming together to really just build some things out. I called it, you know, again, 7 was big in my life. So 7 Divine Design. And again, this was like, at this one, proceeds were going towards Higher Aspirations Academy. So I was learning how to cultivate, you know, what I knew, and to also trying to give back to the community, because I was starting to understand the value of that. Like, to me, it was just meeting a lot of people doing so much good in the community that this is how I knew how to do an event, but also like make it have a purpose for it. So this was something we were doing. You know, I would start to paint more and more in the jazz era. So I did a series called Dominguez on Mars. This is me back in probably early 90s. Back then, with this girl Mahal, I remember she was deep into like, you know, 5%. You know, just a lot of this wisdom being exchanged during this time period. So one of the things to me that really helped transform and really just implemented a lot was the zine world. So at this time, there was a zine called IGT, International Graffiti Times, by Phase 2, one of the most iconic, you know, figures in writing. And I used to buy these whenever I could. It wasn't just the graffiti side of things, but it was also the knowledge. He broke down social economic issues or things that were happening, but did it in a way that was just so raw. And he had a number on here. You could send him pieces. So I literally like just sent him some stuff that I had, and he called me, left a voicemail, said, "I love your work, man. Just come meet me." And he didn't know I was in DC. I was like, "All right, where at?" So he was just like, "Meet me at Union Square, at this address in New York." So I hopped the Greyhound and went up there, and spent a lot of time like listening to him and learning a lot about the culture, but also the components of how to like raise awareness about stuff. So IGT to me is like is something that really left a lot of influence on my life. So Spectre Phase 2, rest in peace, brother. Like he was someone to me that people should all look up and honor in the same way that we would look up, the Basquiat's of the world. Like we need to honor people that come from all different aspects of writing too. So anyway, that was there. So he connected me to a label at the time called Raucous. They wanted some graffiti style stuff for the inside. I remember it was Phase 2 Vulcan, and I did a piece called Sound Bombing. So this was like the sound bombing piece. I had like Mos Def and Eminem, at early Eminem, Brand Nubians, some other folks on it. So I started branching out into more like, doing artwork for all types of different venues. I did a book cover for a good friend of mine, rest in peace, Bobby Hill. He had a show called The B-Side on WPFW. And he was playing like the most unique, rare instrumentals and jazz at that time period. He created a book called Dialogue and Transformation. So I did the cover for him. I actually had the girl I was seeing at the time was roommates with Praz from Fuji's, his girlfriend. So I wound up doing the refugee camp logo. And then, again, this is like me just trying to stretch out and try some things and moving into like more design, but also like film was like at the back period of what I was getting into, but I knew how to edit at this point. And so eventually, let's see where we are. Okay, so eventually I moved to New York, probably late 90s. And we can pivot here. I mean, however you feel.
What's up, everybody? This is Monk again with One9. Thanks for tuning in. This is the second part of the conversation. One9 is going to kind of loop us into his life in New York, and this is kind of going to be focused on his film career and kind of bringing everything full circle. So yeah, back on you, One9 man.
Thank you, man. So yeah, in the late 90s, I was offered the opportunity to move to New York and continue picking up on film and media and TV. I think at this point, I did own the camera and I started shooting, and I still had a lot of the same sensibilities that going into coming up, growing up in the graph era and hip hop, just that whole kind of DIY everything, and that really set me off really on this next path, this next journey. So at that time period, let's say like late 90s, early 2000s, I had some friends and we were coming together because they wanted to talk about, we were thinking about doing the 10-year anniversary of Nas's Illmatic album, right? So a friend of mine, he was a music editor, his name's Eric Parker at Vibe magazine at that time, and I had another friend named Tuma Basa, who was a coordinator at MTV, music video coordinator at MTV and BET. So, we got together and we talked about, at that period, a 10-year anniversary kind of DVD, retrospective of Illmatic that we were just going to make with no funding, just kind of just get together and just pull our resources together. The whole thing was DIY. And so we met up, and we did have access to Nas's father, Oludara. And we basically went over there I had a small little GL1 video camera. We borrowed some cameras from the community center. And again, no money, no financial support, nothing, just filmed his father's story, right? It turned out to be a 4-hour interview on the legacy of the Jones family. So, the history of music and jazz and growing up in Natchez to moving to Queensbridge and, the birth and rise of Nasir Jones. So we had this base to work with. From there, we just went on, again, out of pocket to interview Premier and Pete Rock and some of the other producers on our own. This is without Nas. So we then sent, I cut together like a rough kind of trailer of what we had and sent it to his manager. His manager was like, man, this is real interested. Let's meet up for dinner. And we didn't know at the time, but he did bring Nas to the dinner table. Now, keep in mind, at this point, I never made a film, never made anything of long form content. I had cut some teasers and promos and things like that. And so what I brought with me was some of the graffiti pieces and burners that we did in DC, right? And I told, this was like the pitch. I basically showed them the piece I did on survival. And I said, look, for me, I can help make this because I know how to tell a story. I know how to create layers. I grew up in this. Illmatic was one of the albums I was listening to in my headphones while I was painting this. So it's like, I feel like if you let us, make this story, I can tell it in the same way I told the story on the wall, with these layers, these intersecting lines, this way that it can be deconstructed in a way we'll make it raw, we'll make it honest, we'll make it truthful. And we come from the whole DIY everything. So he just was very observant. He was looking at us, studying us, seeing what our energy was like. And he just said, look, let me see what you can do. So it was a good enough green light to keep moving. So over the course of the next few years, keep in mind, we never made anything. So we didn't know how long this was going to take. So we picked it up and put it down. And eventually I went on to send it to some friends. It got to a very prominent director of photography named Bradford Young, went on to shoot, Star Wars and Arrival. And he's just an amazing, amazing cinematographer. He introduced it to the director of the Ford Foundation named Orlando Bagwell, who directed Eyes on the Prize. And he looked at what we had. He believed in us enough to give us a small grant and to keep going. So it really became official. We presented everything to Nas at that point. And initially wasn't sure if he wanted to do it, but he came by our studio. And at that part in time, we were, this is Slater, but we were renting a space in the Zoo York offices in New York, which was old skateboard, company owned by Mark Echo, but they cleared out. So it was run by these graffiti writers. One of them happened to be Alan Kett, who I mentioned earlier as one of the people who influenced us. And all we had to do, most people were paying rent by giving the painting a month, right? So in there was some of these graph legends. So a friend of mine at that time was Mayor 139, and he allowed us to use his edit facilities to work out of. So we basically were able to put together the film over the course of the next few years. And, I got it to a friend of mine at Tribeca, and the head of Tribeca came to our studio to look at a rough cut. And they said, we feel this is strong enough to open up our whole festival. So our very first film, never made a film in our life, never did anything, opened up the 2014 Tribeca Film Festival in New York. So this is a picture of me and Eric and the team in Queensbridge shooting Nas and Jungle. I was shooting on the Super 8, so I was actually getting that really feel that I liked, which kept things loose and organic. So this is me and Nas at the press conference for Tribeca, and opening night was an event here in New York. I mean, it was like lines around the block. It sold out. It was at the infamous Beacon Theater. It's only like 3,000 people. So Nas had agreed to perform Illmatic at the premiere right after the film. I mean, you gotta think about it. This is someone that came up doing graph and had no idea about, the power of film. But to me, this wasn't just about the film itself. It really enabled us to tell a bigger story and me to find a voice that, can really, in my mind, tell stories that can inspire and uplift the culture. It wasn't just a film about Illmatic, it was a family and a generational film. So, here's us at the opening night. It's me, Nas's brother, Jungle, Nas, and my partner, Eric Parker. So, we pushed on and went through this and really pushed this to become something that was beyond us, Opening night, I don't know if you see, this is Robert De Niro and Jane Rosenthal, which headed Tribeca. It's quite an honor to be introduced by Robert De Niro. And At the time they were like, hey, Jane and Bob want you to introduce the film. I'm like, oh, who's Bob? And he comes up, he's like, hey, how you doing, man? It's Robert De Niro. And he's like, how do you want me to introduce you? I said, as One9, because that's to me was like the official way to honor all of the graph and the hip hop, identity that gave me the freedom and identity to be here and independence to be here. So to me, that was like the mark of like, all right, well now I'm gonna use this same identity that brought me up here and keep going with it, and this reminded me of the freedom that I had growing up. So I kept the name One9 in the film world. So this was opening night, it's packed house. It was an amazing event, again, for someone that's never made anything. This not only opened Tribeca, but it toured around the country. We actually toured it international with Nas performing at several different venues, and it really changed my life. So at this point, I was now a film director, and embarking on the new journey, all stemming back from the identity that I created in DC. That DC created me. So in a sense, I was just really like honoring everything that came forward after that. During this time period, I got a chance to meet John Singleton. He called about coming to LA and making a film on the LA riots. I said, I'm not from LA. He said, great, man. I love what you do to uplift the community's voice. He says, make the film that the media is scared to make. And, we had to go deep into the Florence and Normandy communities. We had to deal with A-Trade gang members and get permission, all this, but we made the film, and John was, a bit of a mentor at that point because of all the history for Boys in the Hood and everything else. So that film called LA Burning was our second film, and we were actually nominated for an Emmy off of that film. So here's me and John and our editors. So that helped change, the course of my whole life. And to me, this is like a different path. So it all stemmed back to, again, being independent and being free, and then coming up in a community like DC, which to me represented the underdog. So in turn, I try to make films that represent the underdog or represent the communities that haven't got the voice to really fully understand the story. So that's been basically our journey. And yeah, man, I'm very honored now to tell the story. I've been asked by the Ashkadon family to direct a 5-part series on the life of Nipsey Hussle. So that's my current project, and that'll be coming out with LeBron James and Spring Hill as our partners in 2023.
Wow. Wow. Got you. Yeah, you kind of mentioned earlier, prior to our session, that you had a still of you playing chess, and there was a story behind it. Could you break that down for us as well?
Yeah. So growing up, in DC, I actually met a girl when I was probably in like early 20s, and she lived on Second and Rhode Island. Shout out to Kiana. And I went over there, and all she had was like a saxophone and a chessboard. There was like an empty apartment, and it looked like, I think it might have been a broke TV or TV in there. But she showed me how to play chess, and I knew at that point, but I love what the game offered. Over the years, I kept playing and playing and playing to the point where I was playing pretty much every day, either in the parks or on the app. And it just, enabled me to visualize. Basically, you're moving with your eyes before your hands. So you're seeing the board, you're seeing moves, 2, 3, 4, 10 spaces ahead. You're also seeing your strengths, your ability to improvise, your ability to have patience, your ability to take risks, your ability to see spacing, and you're also playing your opponent's personality. So you're also reading energy. So all the beautiful things in life I see in the game of chess, and it really helped me with making moves in life. So really, like, I would wake up every morning and I make one move a day, and it helps sharpen and stimulate your brain to really to take your time to be patient, but also to be aggressive, to take risks, and see space and to visualize. And I think it's so key with any art form or film or anything you're doing creatively, is to have those processes, is to not rush, is to be able to breathe and see things and measure things out. So over the years, I came and, started playing, and I got a friend of mine that, he said, hey, I want you to meet up with RZA. He wants to talk to you about some projects. I said, all right, well, why don't we just play chess? Because I know he plays. It's the whole Wu-Tang, ethos. So we sat down and we played, but what he didn't know, like probably weeks before, I was like studying and studying how to sacrifice, because the sacrifice is a big part of the game, but you can't just do it recklessly. So, when we first played, not only did I sacrifice once, I sacrificed twice. And, I wound up beating him the first game. And he said, I like your foresight. I like how you see, and I like your foresight into this game. So he wound up playing a few of them. We wound up splitting overall, but it is something I'll never forget. Like, I love, obviously Wu-Tang, but love the fact that we were just having a very stimulating game, chess, and talking about creativity and movement and building. So it is something I highly recommend. I play every day to this day. I'll get out playing the parks if I can, but it is something that I use as a tool. So again, it's like a beautiful, beautiful sport, if you will. It's something to pick up, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, definitely. I love playing chess myself, so I'm a big chess player too. So, so yeah, I had a couple of questions, maybe about two or three. The first one being for you. You talked about the importance of your name carrying with you from both mediums, throughout your life. But when you first made the name One9, like what was the original intention behind the name when you first created it?
Yeah. So, different iterations were initially when I was young, I wrote Sly/C. I went on to write Send, or Sender, one, which was like the early zine years. And then there was a time period we were going to Pyramid Books, I think it was called, on Georgia Avenue. It was, books on Egyptology and numerology, all these things. So, my life, I've always been interested in the extremes, extremes from dark to light, pain to pleasure, left, things that take you from the darkest moment to moments of light. And I use that in my films. But One9 was, again, a balance of extremes. One being the beginning, 9 completion. And I've always wanted to go from one end of the spectrum to the other. And I feel like if you're able to hit both sides of the pendulum, no matter what it is, you can apply that to anything in life. I've always tried to find, that sense of the extremities, So in my films, I've always wanted to go to the darkest moment, and how did that person find the light? How did they come to the crossroads and say, you know what, I'm not going to succumb to this. I'm going to find this, and Nas was different, instances. He lost his best friend, Ill Will. And he says, he was at a point where he's ready to take matters into his own hands with all his friends, but he knew music was his best, so there was a crossroads in that. I got a chance to work with Dan Rather, the legendary journalist and pioneer of journalism in a sense, along with Edward Murrow. But from Dan Rather, his point was he had rheumatism and he was bedridden at age like 14 and 15, and in a dark room, and his best friend became their radio. And from that, he learned how to improvise, how to hold and create stories. So, for me, growing up, I've always, whether it was painting on a wall or just, painting in general, or whatever it was, is going to the extreme, the furthest extreme, and then bringing it to the other extreme. I think if you're at your darkest moment, to me, that's where the isolation builds character. So I've always wanted to balance the extremes or find the ends of the pendulum. So I just took numbers that kind of signify that, 1 beginning, 9 completion, and kept it. But I just wrote 1 out. I didn't want to be misconstrued as 19. So I just used that, and I just became something more where it's like, it reminded me of that freedom, and it reminded me of the independence of growing up in DC It reminded me of the underdog mentality. So that to me is things that stuck with me to this day as a film director and producer.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. The second and last question was that when we talked on the phone, we were getting to know each other, and you said something that kind of resonated with me even till tonight. It's kind of just stuck in my head, and I think it was very powerful, and I think other people can kind of embrace this as well. You told me that there's no more powerful thing than to uplift others. You know, there's like there's a gift in uplifting other people around you. I feel like that's like such a big representation of who you are as well. Can you speak on that as well with the power of like
Yeah,
uplifting others? Yeah.
yeah, I think, just the adage living through giving, and but when I really started thinking about it, right, like I never really wrote the name One9 on the wall as the primary focus is me. I realized at that point a lot of the stuff we were doing, I was teaching kids, right? And at that point it was I loved doing it because I loved just being out, but I also loved the immediate impact. You saw an undeniable light in those kids' eyes, like when they learned something and they applied it, right? So that was early. I'm young and I'm still learning myself, but at that period I'm still like educating myself, but I was giving something to them kids, and whatever it was transferred, right? And over the course of time, when we started making films, especially really the first one, the Knots, when I realized I started getting all these emails and people were saying, "Thank you for making this. It inspired me to do that." And it felt natural, it felt real. And I felt like, all right, what am I really looking for in life? I'm always looking to go to be free, right? To be independent of anything, of anyone. And I learned that when I'm giving or I'm not making something for me, it's just coming through me, the world opens up. Everything becomes an option, right? And it's like that freedom and then independence comes from giving, right? So whatever you use as a tool, if you're not using it to just do it for yourself, to make yourself whatever, it's gonna open up all these things. And it's come over the years. I just realized, to me, it feels natural, right? So not to preach it, but you do whatever you want. But it's just like that to me is like, look, man, I want to travel the world. That film took me around the world and back, everything paid for everything. But it wasn't about me. It was about, hey, this is a great story. I was very honored to work with one of the greatest, if not the greatest MCs, if not one of the greatest hip hop albums, one of the greatest albums of all time in Illmatic. And so that to me gave me all of that freedom to and ability to see, hey, this is a guidepost that you can do anything you want. I didn't go to film school. I'm not trained. I didn't do any of that stuff. I just did it because I felt like I had a love and a passion to do it. So the passion, the purpose is key. Like your purpose will define every move you make. And I think that to me stems all the way back to DC days of like, hey, we did everything ourselves. We cut and paste zines. We went out and did whatever graph we wanted to do. We did whatever you did to express yourself, to me needs to be, you know, respected, and what you're doing and chronologically and curating and putting this together so people can understand those stories is so important. So that to me, I tip my hat to everyone who came up in DC in that time period, survived. And I loved hearing the stories that from some of the other people you featured because to me it's still an underdog city and it's small, comparatively to some of the New Yorks and Chicago's, LA's of the world. But the heart is key, man. And the heart of DC is fucking strong, bro. I love the DC mentality from those days and still do. So, tip of the hat, salute, and much respect.
Thank you, man. I just want to say before we wrap this up, man, I just want to say it was an honor to have you on here tonight. And just the fact that you pitched this whole different way of doing an interview is something I'm going to have to definitely consider in the future. Because having a visual to people's stories is also another aspect of telling the truth, putting people there And I think
Yeah.
what we did today was special, man. So I just want to say thank you for that. And more importantly, was there anything that you wanted to get off, or anything that we didn't talk about, like any shout outs you want to express, or anything you want to say to everybody watching tonight, or that we'll be watching tomorrow?
Yeah, man, I just, I hope, this grows into something that, helps shape and people's understanding of the time period and they learn from it. That's all, man. I think, we're in a visual world where content is king. Like everything we create. That's why I was like, if you're gonna spend the time with me, taking the time out of your schedule, then let me take the time out of mine and give you something that, that at least stimulates all these memories. That's why I wanted to take the time to make sure that there was some visual component to this. Plus, I'm a fucking filmmaker, bro. I was doing myself justice if I didn't show you anything visual. I had all this audio that I was gonna put into that too. It's just it's process, but I at least wanted to give you this time. But look, man, I think to anybody's watching this shit, man, just know that whatever you're building, take every moment, make sure it's right, make sure it's pure, make sure it's like fulfills your fucking purpose of who you are, because everything matters. Everything matters, man. Every detail that we just did to make this happen matters, because who knows who's watching this is gonna be like, man, this stimulated all these ideas, right? And so that to me is like legacy work, man. Make sure that whatever you're doing matters, it's for a higher purpose, and you'll find yourself with the freedom that you're looking for.
Yes, sir. That's beautifully said, man.
Thank you
1-9,
so
thank
much,
you,
man.
man. Thank you so much for tonight, bro.
Thank you, brother, man. Have a beautiful New Year. Stay blessed, and we'll talk soon, man. Much love.
Definitely well, bro. Much love.
All
Much
right.
love.
Respect.